Good evening, Santa Cruz County and all of our worldwide web listeners at communitytv.org. My name is Sandino Gomez, and I'm here tonight with Voices from the Village, Community TV's longest running, old standing, good old community conversation talk show here in our studios. And it's, the 24th of June? The 24th of June, 2012, and we're here tonight with a panel of guests. You saw their names on the titles there as we opened up, but we have Michael Mayer, Mireya Gomez, and Paul Johnston, who will all be talking to us about various aspects and different policies around immigration as kind of the large catch-all topic. But really we're going to talk specifically about Obama's recent decision, the action deferred that he's going to do around keeping younger migrant people here in the country. We're going to also be talking about the DREAM Act, which would be a legislative way rather than just a policy way of actually allowing young people to stay in this country and establish residency and pursue an actual future instead of a life in the shadows. And speaking of a life in the shadows, we'll be talking also about the Secure Communities program of the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, the Department of Homeland Security's kind of background check on everyone who goes through any kind of city or county or government, state jail program, any kind of detention facility. People who go through these facilities now are being scanned for immigration flags and violations and things like that, which is caused quite an uproar over the past, pretty much since the program's inception. But we'll get more into both the Secure Communities, the DREAM Act, and immigration reform kind of in general and Obama's recent action in a little bit. But for now, I think usually we kick off with a little bit of a well, you know what, actually, we'll switch it up right now. We're going to actually introduce our guests here and give them a chance to say hello, and then maybe we'll watch what Santa Cruz had to say around immigration together, and we can get some reactions from that. Actually, I think that'd be fun, rather than break the flow of the show. So immediately to my right here, we have Paul Johnston, longtime community organizer, and what's the phrase you use, a sociologist?
I'm a public sociologist.
Public sociologist, that's what it was, yeah.
Some people call me a free-range, cage-free sociologist.
Okay. You don't like those little protest pens they set up for people to exercise their free speech, in other words?
Post-academic. No, I participate as a sociologist in the settings that I study, and I try to help make a difference while I learn.
Great. No, that's what we need more of, definitely. And you're representing, you're involved with the Immigration Action Group.
We're the Immigration Action Group, and also represented here is the Monterey County Immigration Coalition.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us. To Paul's right, yeah, do you have something to say? Sorry.
No, okay, I'm looking to my right.
Paul's right, here we go. We have Mireya Gomez, Director of the Community Action Board's Day Laborer Center,
That's
if I'm
right.
correctly stating your title?
Well, it's the Day Worker Center of Santa Cruz County. And so I'm a lifelong nonprofit worker, and I've been with the Day Worker Center at the Community Action Board of Santa Cruz County for 3 years now.
Great.
Yeah.
And tell us a little bit about what that does, maybe.
Well, the Day Worker Center is not quite open yet, but I would like to be contributing to this conversation and talking about how day workers are affected by some of these immigration laws, specifically secure communities. And so I'll talk about the perspective of day workers from their role as parents of dreamers as well.
Right. Great. Well, thank you for coming and welcome to the show. And then finally to Mireya's right, you're going to help me out with the last name. Michael
Mayer.
Okay, yeah. It's Mayer. Great. You are an attorney?
That's correct.
Here?
Yes, I'm a local immigration attorney. I've practiced in this community for the last 30 years. Great. And I specialize in the needs of immigrants who are seeking family immigration, and also who might get caught up in ICE holds or raids, and will hopefully be doing work with people who are applying for deferred action, as we'll talk about that later.
Great. Well, again, I want to welcome you all to the show, Community Television's Voices from the Village. And speaking of Voices from the Village, why don't we now go to our segments recorded live on the street here in Santa Cruz, usually on Pacific Avenue. What did you have to say about immigration, Santa Cruz? Let's find out.
This is Voices from the Village. We're the farmers market in Santa Cruz. We're asking people today, what do you think about the immigration situation in this country?
me, it's that at least the young people who came here with their parents, there's no reason for them to be punished. And I think the whole immigration system could be a lot less complex and a lot better for people. And I mean, now we just found out that the most immigrants are coming from Asian countries rather than Mexican countries, and like everyone should have an equal opportunity to come here and experience it if they want to.
Well, I come from a long line of immigrants who have worked in the fields and gone into education, and I think immigration is really important, especially with the passage of the DREAM Act. All of these students who are here going into the workforce and doing a lot of good, I think it's amazing, and that we should really support that, and especially students and all these young kids who originally might have been deported at some time. Now they have the chance to, live the American dream and be here, and I support immigration. Maybe there should be some reform, but also I think the process to become a naturalized citizen is very difficult and can be changed, and there's a lot of jobs that need to be filled, especially in farm work and in just jobs that people don't want to take. And so I support immigration into the U.S.
Yes, it's been shown to help our economy overall. I mean, there are pluses and there are minuses, but I think that what I've read is that the overall effect is beneficial.
I'm very, very supportive of the Mexicans that are in our country looking for work. I think there's a bunch of fallacies going around. I mean, I don't think they're withholding jobs from the rest of the country, because I don't think anybody wants to do their job. Their jobs are so difficult. We've had a restaurant for many years, and we know that there are only the gringos wouldn't do their work.
Oh no, there's definite there's definite issues with immigration, and it's but at the same time it's easy to make that an issue that you can use as a wedge issue to come raise people's fears to get in. To get your other agenda and platform going, so you can get a lot of attention that way.
I think there's better and more humanitarian, more humane and socially just ways to deal with these issues of people wanting to live where there's more opportunities than just enforce a line, like put a line on the earth and say people can't cross this line, otherwise we'll arrest or kill them. And I just think that's not a good way for us to be living together and coexisting as a human family. Because I think a big issue is us, the whole issue of immigration stems from us seeing ourselves as a nation, whereas we are this entity and they are this other entity. And I think as we evolve as a human species, hopefully we'll be able to embrace everyone on the planet as a human family and won't see it as we're Americans, they are another nationality, but rather see that we're all part of this global community.
That's what people have to say today in the farmers market. Back to you in the studio.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. Santa Cruz County. I guess it looks like the West Side Farmers Market, if I'm not mistaken. Always a colorful group of characters and an interesting kind of cross-section, but really it seemed like a lot of kind of support for immigration and immigrants, and kind of a frustration, it seems, with a larger sense of policy and kind of what's happening with the situation in general around immigration, and perhaps some of the historical and more recent scapegoating that happens around immigrant communities and things like that. So it's kind of a little bit of what I heard there, but maybe we could go around the table, and if there's any reactions to what we heard, anything that we could hear, that is to say. Anything that struck you all?
Well, one thing that struck me is that almost everyone who was interviewed there mentioned jobs and employment. And, just thinking about the Day Worker Center, thinking about day laborers, we've been trying to open up a Day Worker Center here for over 3 years, over 5 years, actually. And the truth is that immigrants, for the most part, come here to work. And so as far as the Day Worker Center goes, it is one way that we are on a local and more immediate level trying to address some of the issues that come up on both sides, right? So public safety is a big concern for a lot of people. when they think about immigrants and working in our communities, and also abuse on both sides. So those two issues, I think, employment and immigration are tied.
Certainly.
What resonated for me was the person that said that children who have come to the United States shouldn't be penalized or punished because their parents brought them here a long time ago when they were young.
Right.
And I think that's really important, and I think the majority of the people in the United States go along with that, and Obama has had strong support for the policy he announced on June 15th.
So maybe you could go into that a little bit for those viewers out there that don't know. Maybe you could just tell us a little bit about what Obama did recently regarding that policy change, because it was,
Right.
a lot of people understand it somewhat, but maybe just so everyone
Right.
does.
So what Obama announced was that he was enacting a deferred action by executive action. Deferred action means that individuals who meet certain eligibility criteria will not be put in removal proceedings. Those eligibility criteria basically are, number one, they have to have come to the United States under the age of 16. Number two, they have to have continuously resided in the United States for at least 5 years preceding the date of the memorandum and are present in the United States as of June 15th. They have to currently be in school, have graduated from high school, or obtained a general education development certificate known as a GED, or are honorably discharged from the Coast Guard or Armed Forces of the United States. Number four, they cannot be excluded because of a conviction. They would be excluded from eligibility requirements if they have a conviction for a felony, a significant misdemeanor offense, multiple misdemeanor offense, or otherwise pose a threat, such as gang members, and they must not be above the age of 30. So these are the basic eligibility criteria, and it will not confer permanent residency or a pathway to citizenship, but it will prevent them, these individuals, from being put in removal proceedings, and the period will be for a 2-year period with renewal thereafter. There's a lot more to the program about implementation, application, et cetera, that I can go into, but those are the basic eligibility criteria.
From what I understand, it sounds very similar to the DREAM Act's
right.
classifications?
Exactly, it is similar. The main difference is that the DREAM Act would confer legal status so that a person could become a permanent resident and then become a citizen later on. Whereas deferred action does not confer any legal status, it just prevents removal. They will be able, individuals who are eligible and apply will be given the right to get a work permit if they can show the necessity for work, an economic necessity, but they won't have any certainty, for example, that the next president of the United States, if, for example, Romney got elected, wouldn't retract the executive action.
Although, the only thing I would add to that is that in some ways this goes beyond the DREAM Act, federal DREAM Act, because the DREAM Act applies to people who go to college or enroll in the military. And it only applies to people up to the ages, up to, I think it's 21, it's in their early 20s. Whereas this applies to everyone who is in high school or returns to high school, who's dropped out perhaps, or has GED. Or we hope, this is one of the things that has to be clarified, maybe dropped out and is now going back for their GED. So it applies to a much broader category of people, and it's not just for the folks who might be able to make it to college, which is a pretty small percentage, or who enlist in the military. Both of these programs are limited in terms of extending rights to this whole population. But I think I'm very enthusiastic about this because it allows a much larger number of people to work without fear of being fired or turned in. Hopefully in California to get driver's licenses, basically to come out of the shadows and participate in our community in such a way that they can help to, with confidence, work to continue to expand their rights and the rights of their family members.
So, I mean, in theory, someone was picked up by the Secure Communities Program, the flag came up, but if they met those criteria, that person would then probably be conditionally released back into the community.
Now.
If I mean, is that a
Exactly.
That's right. As of now, that's what's happening.
Okay.
And that's a huge step forward. But it's important, and I think this is one of Mike's points, is that the application process is not clear yet. Nobody can or should attempt to apply now, and anybody who tries to help you apply, especially if they're going to charge money,
Yes.
is probably taking advantage of you.
Yeah.
The federal regulations that govern this process are not going to come out until at least the middle of August. They say the middle of August. Perhaps that will slip, but it'll be the end of summer before we know how people can affirmatively apply for this program.
Wow. So I'd mentioned the Secure Communities Program, and many of our viewers probably already understand that a little bit, but since I referenced it in directly relation to this policy change, maybe you could just break down really quick, what is the Secure Communities Program, and how is that tied up with this larger thing? And you know,
in a nutshell,
if you will. I wasn't going to say it quite like that, but yeah.
I'll do my best.
In summary.
Well, let's say it's a perversely named program,
Right.
because it places a whole community in an insecure status. What the Secure Communities Program advertises itself as a program that's intended to remove dangerous criminals, predators, etc., from our community, and in order to do so, it makes every law enforcement officer in the country really part of a net. Anybody who's brought in and booked at a county jail or the local facility has their fingerprints run, and under Secure Communities, those fingerprints are shared with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And if the person is in their computers as being out of status, then they can make a request that the local agency hold them for deportation. Now, of course, many of those people never even have charges filed against them. And many, in fact, most are being brought in for very minor charges. And while ICE says, well, our priority are the violent offenders, in fact, those are only a small percentage of the people for whom they make detainer requests. And sadly, our Sheriff Phil Wowak, here in Santa Cruz County, has chosen to detain anybody who has any charge against them, whether it's driving without a license, which is not uncommon for someone who doesn't have papers in this country,
certainly.
or spousal abuse. And this is something that the folks who are responsible for protecting women from spousal abuse feel is a deep problem, because breaking up families and deporting spouses rather than helping and protecting those families and counseling them and giving them the support that they need, taking away the breadwinners is the worst thing you can do.
Right.
So unfortunately, so far, our sheriff is not exercising his discretion to only comply with detainer requests for serious and violent offenders. And so we, along with other people in California, are asking through the legislative process in Sacramento, we are asking the state to adopt criteria that would govern what local sheriffs do, and that it's called the Trust Act, and it's now moving through the Senate. And the idea is to try to restore the trust, because right now, immigrant communities, especially undocumented communities, essentially have lost trust in local law enforcement, and they can no longer call upon them for protection. They can no longer safely cooperate with them. The Trust Act would restore that, and the good news is that it's just moved to the Senate out of committee. It's going to be voted on before the end of this month, perhaps as early as the end of this week, but certainly by July 2nd. So it's moving, it's advancing, and unfortunately we don't have an endorsement yet from our sheriff, although we do have an endorsement from our Board of Supervisors. So Sheriff Wowak needs to hear from you. Sheriff Phil Wowak needs to hear from all of us. He needs to be encouraged to provide some leadership on this front.
In fact, Sheriff Wowak has said at the Board of Supervisors that 10% of the individuals that are rounded up under this ICE Secured Communities Program when they enter the jail don't have any charges. For example, I had a family member phone me that their family member was arrested, brought to the jail, but no charges were filed. Yet she had an ICE hold and was in fact deported. So the sheriff himself says that these people shouldn't be subject to the ICE program. Yet Sheriff Wowak has refused to immediately commence a program where these individuals would not be subject to the ICE detainer. He's proposed a point system, which we believe is unfair because the point system looks at a length of residence in the United States and other factors which are irrelevant to the criteria that should be used, which is whether the person has been convicted of a serious or violent felony.
I mean, it's essentially judging these people, or putting a harsher punishment on them than would fit the actual crime. It seems
exactly.
Like denial of due process. I mean,
well, unfortunately, it happens every day that
right.
individuals with very minor offenses are being picked up under the Secure Communities program, and it breaks apart families. It's really tragic. Even where the person has committed an offense which everybody abhors, like domestic violence, oftentimes the last thing the spouse might want is that breadwinner be deported. The spouse wants the domestic violence to stop, but doesn't necessarily want the spouse to be deported away from the family, right. where then the victim is doubly victimized.
I mean, correct me if I'm mistaken, but I've always understood in a lot of ways the federal immigration policy has always been focused around family reunification and the connection between families, family members being able to sponsor each other. And it seems like this program especially is really kind of contradictory to that original spirit of, family values, if you will. And it's sad that it seems that the Republican Party, which, not to get all partisan, but both parties, but more perhaps the Republicans, they really take a hardline stance about this when they also wrap themselves in these family values labels. But it seems like, again, the rhetoric doesn't meet the policy.
Yes, I think that's so true. I can't emphasize how important it is that so many families, I mean, every family of farm workers, especially in our region, and day laborers and others, extends across the border. And this division, this fear, this inability to travel. I mean, for example, my son is, in September, we're celebrating his wedding to a young woman who comes from Guanajuato. And her family is not being allowed to travel here for the wedding celebration. That's a price that we pay. Yeah. We're happy we're going to go to Guanajuato and have a party. But I mean, for other families, it's much more profound and difficult. Let's say your parents are sick in Oaxaca and you want to go and care for them. But you know that in order to do that, you risk so much in terms of your life and your family.
Right. Really quick, just before this is great. We're continuing the conversation, but we're inviting more voices in. This is a live call-in show. It is June 24th, 2012. And if I'm not mistaken, Lupe from Watsonville is on the phone. Can you hear us, Lupe?
Muy bien.
Excuse me, hi. You don't sound like a Lupe. What's your name?
Lupe. Me llamo Lupe.
Pues, disculpa. Hello. Welcome to the show. ¿Quieres hablar en español, inglés? ¿Cómo quieres?
Lo que es. Pero inglés me gusta hablar en inglés.
Pues, better that we talk in English to all of our viewers. We just keep the conversation consistent.
Yeah, well, sure. I want people to be able to understand. The first thing I'd like to say is that in terms of Sheriff Wowak, I think he's doing a very good job. In the first instance, his obligation to do this is not an optional obligation. It's a federal law. And when you mentioned that 10%, there were a possible 10% of the detainees who were on minor charges, I think what we first should tell listeners is that everybody who is arrested in Monterey and Santa Cruz County has to go through the Secure Communities check. Is that correct, Mr. Mayor?
That is correct.
Yeah. Okay. So everybody, it's not so. And in this area here, I think there's around 60,000 undocumented workers in Monterey County, probably around 25,000 in Santa Cruz County. So we have potentially around 80,000 people here in a population of 660,000 in Santa Cruz and Monterey County who are potentially aggrieved parties here who might be detained inappropriately. So I think there were around 14,000 arrests in Santa Cruz County. There are around 80,000 potentially aggrieved parties of illegal workers. And of those, I think there were 150 detainees in Santa Cruz County. And of those, I think there were 15 possible aggrieved parties here. So I think that's a pretty good, and so 135 people were properly detained, and taken away by ICE, and they could be terrorists, they could be who knows what. So in that instance, I think Sheriff Wowak has done a very good job of protecting our community in the first instance. The next instance is in the instance of Onaleros. I think that the reason that we're doing this here is to get people off the streets. So they're not standing in front of Builders Depot. Provide some type of aid for people who are here to get opportunities to work,
So what just on that very topic, what would be your kind of stance towards a day worker center? Where exactly?
Well, I think that since we have so many people seasonally working here, and sanctuary programs for them in Watsonville, that's certainly justified. Santa Cruz, I think there's no rational basis for that at all in the city of Santa Cruz. But so these people are here; they should be given an opportunity to work. But the problem I have with this is every person who is here illegally constitutes a state and federal felony. Every one of these people who takes a job is an additional state and federal felony. Every person who hires them is a state and federal felony. Now, for the county of Santa Cruz, 5 supervisors who take an official action which aids and abets the commission of state and federal felonies is what's called aiding and abetting, and subjects them to incarceration and federal felony incarceration. But also, any act that one of these people who has been harbored, aided, and abetted also subjects citizens, taxpayers of the county of Santa Cruz to civil liabilities for the wrongful death or any type of civil actions that they take. So for the county of Santa Cruz to take an official action, I believe is illegal and improper. Now, so that's my problem with that. I'd like to hear your response. Thank you very much.
Could I respond first?
Go for it, right ahead, yeah.
First, you mentioned that I said that individuals with minor charges are being subjected to secure communities. That's true, but I also said that approximately 10%, according to Sheriff Wowak, have no charges at all. For example, they may be brought in for a fairly minor offense, but they aren't actually charged with anything because it is so minor. So people are being subject to this dragnet at the jail, even with no charges at all. Secondly, you said that all undocumented workers have committed a state or federal felony. That's incorrect. Illegal entry at the border is a federal misdemeanor, but it's not a continuing offense. So once they're no longer at the border, it's a civil violation, not a criminal offense. And in no way is it a felony. I'm sure others around this table have other comments.
Except maybe in the state of Arizona.
Well,
that's a whole nother.
That's right. That's right.
That's another. Says about that.
That's another topic.
Maria, you have some thoughts about this?
Well, the only thing that I wanted to correct is that the Day Worker Center, while it's there to encourage workers to come to the center to be able to negotiate fair wages and be able to make agreements about the work conditions that are fair for both parties, one of the things that day worker centers don't do is remove all day laborers from in front of stores like Home Depot or here in Santa Cruz, ProBuild on River Street. That's all I'll say for now.
And I assume no litmus test is run on these people to determine if they're undocumented. They could be documented or undocumented. Nobody's asking them to produce any paperwork. Is that correct?
That is correct. The Day Worker Center is not the employer. And so what the Day Worker Center staff is there to do is to make sure that the agreements that are made between the worker and the employer are carried out in a good way, right, in a respectful way, and that both the worker is not abused in any way or doesn't suffer any kind of wage theft, and also that the employer receives quality services in the community. But as far as the center asking for any kind of immigration documents, that's not something that any day worker center that I know of does. Yeah.
Paul, yeah. Reaction to our friend's words?
Well, I think Mike pointed out the basic, I guess would say, misunderstandings in the gentleman's statements. But let's focus in on this question about the number of people who come through our jail who wound up being deported, who he felt it was a very minor number of people who might be aggrieved. The reality is, 1 out of every 100 people who walks through that door is turned over to ICE for deportation. 1 out of every 100. And there are more who are still being held while they're being processed, even if they're brought in on a minor offense, because the sheriff feels that if he was to release them on the normal process of OR or even a bail, that they might not show because they're afraid they'll be deported.
Right.
So brought in on a traffic offense, and they're held in jail to be deported. I think, there's a general perspective I think is useful for me anyway. When I look at this, I think as a sociologist, sometimes we don't see the things around us. We don't really recognize what's going on around us, and sometimes it takes some distance and some perspective, maybe years, to really understand the significance. But the way I see it, in a way, we're like the people of South Africa, perhaps, or even our own community looking back to the Vietnam War. There'll be a time when our children will be asking us, you lived in that time when there were thousands and thousands and thousands of people around you doing the hardest work, producing most of the wealth, who didn't have any rights. And thank God we changed it. And what did you do? What did you do? And I think those initially recorded comments by the citizens of Santa Cruz really, more than this caller, reflected our values, and it really reminded me of why I'm so proud to be a citizen of Santa Cruz.
Right.
Yeah.
This was brought home to me when I recently was visiting the Smithsonian Institute of History in Washington, D.C., and I saw there were a bunch of exhibits of civil rights movements and aggrieved people throughout the country's history, from slavery to the civil rights movement in the South. And lo and behold, there was a picture of shacks that were used during the Bracero program in Salinas and Watsonville, and I said, it's in our own backyard, and although we no longer have the Bracero program, we still have those shacks.
That's right.
A lot of those migrant farm camps.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, I think just responding to the caller as well, he perhaps got a little confused because there was legislation several years ago. I believe it was House Resolution 4437, also known as the Sensenbrenner Bill, and that would have made it a felony to be in the country.
That's correct.
Without documentation, and anyone who aided and abetted, as the person also made reference to, whether that's a county supervisor, local police officer, family member, teachers, nurses, doctors, really would have created a horrible, horrible spy network that kind of deputizing anyone and everyone to snitch out their neighbors in this sick Nazi Germany kind of way in the supposed land of the free. Furthermore, it would have created an entirely system of legalized racial profiling, which again is always a controversial subject, whether we're talking, in Los Angeles and the Rampart police corruption, or whether we're talking about right here in Santa Cruz. And Tony Madrigal's comments several years ago about there may or may not have been racial profiling on Halloween here on Pacific Avenue, and the uproar that those comments caused within the local political establishment, and kind of a real shame. So it seems like that misinformation around the felony status is perhaps at the root of some of our friends' misunderstanding there. But thankfully that legislation did not pass. It did not make it out of the House. It did not get into the Senate. So,
well, there was one other misunderstanding in this gentleman's comments, which was he said that the sheriff was simply complying with federal law. Now, and I think it's taken us a year and a half. We finally got Sheriff Wowak to acknowledge, because he was saying this himself for the first year and a half, that the federal law required him to detain people for deportation in our county jail. And he's finally acknowledged that all the federal law requires him to do is to share information about who was booked. The detainer request is separate. It's not actually part of the Secure Communities program. The detainer request is discretionary. He now acknowledges that. That's why he's talking about not detaining at least that 10% who are in our jails for some strange reason but are never charged with anything. But he acknowledges he has discretion. So the gentleman, Lupe, I think it would be helpful for you to go back and take a look at that. I think if you talk to Sheriff Wowak, and you might know him. Do you know him? You might want to go back and touch bases with Sheriff Wowak, and he'll tell you that he does in fact have the discretion to exercise some wisdom here.
Great. Well, again, to remind folks, this is a live call-in show. We are talking about immigration, the Secure Communities Program, the DREAM Act, Obama's recent executive order for deferred action on deportation proceedings for young folks that meet certain criteria. All of this and more here live on community television, communitytelevision.org if you're watching online. The call-in number is 425-8844. Give us a ring if you'd like, but I think we'll continue around the table here. We've talked a little bit about the kind of aspect of, the impact that these policies have on families and on breadwinners, the kind of rhetoric around family values versus the actual reality of the policy. I'm just curious, Mireya, in your work with the Day Worker Center, how much have you seen this? Or I know you've been a longtime community activist with a lot of different groups in the South County area. So just even any experience you think, maybe just displaying kind of the, how do you say, the tough nature of this.
Yeah. Well, there's definitely a lot of fear out on the streets on the part of day laborers about both secure communities and E-Verify, and there's also a lack of awareness about the DREAM Act. Within the day laborer population, there's a lot of differences. There's workers that come from different parts of Mexico and other Latin American countries. There are single fathers that are day workers. There are day laborers that have been here for over 10 years. There are day workers that are documented, some who aren't documented. And, one of the things that day workers have learned to do is that there's a system of communication that works really well. And so when policies like these come up and either in the paper or if they're heard about on TV, they quickly learn about both the policy and sometimes they have ways of communicating with each other so that they, for example, many of them, well, not even many of them, some of them don't have driver's licenses. Actually, the majority of them don't drive. They ride bikes or walk or use the bus. But one of the things that the Day Worker Center is going to do is that it's going to bring a sense of safety, and it's going to bring more awareness, and it's going to also bring more opportunities so that, I talked about their single fathers. There's one single father in particular now that's begun to participate more in our programs and the little bit of services that we're offering now. And he's very proud of his son, and he has been working here for over 10 years, and his son is about to graduate or just graduated from Santa Cruz High. And I know Paul already mentioned how these policies and these laws really at the core are separating families that are our neighbors. There's people that there are immigrants that live on our street, on our block, in our neighborhoods, that serve our food, that keep our gardens green. And it's really a horrible thing to think about these policies and what they do on the ground. And I definitely hear stories on a weekly basis about either deportations or just scares, and people, and that's traumatic. Yeah. And especially on a longer term basis. An entire community is traumatized.
Well, millions of people living a second-class lifestyle without access to rights or privileges or the things that we take for granted often as citizens or legal residents. It seems that this entire immigration fiasco, the failure of the federal government to have a sane and sensible policy, as well as the failure of economic policies, often originating from the United States. I guess I'm specifically referring to like NAFTA and the effect it had on Mexico. When you look at the Mexican economy being devastated, this is supposed to be something that would be good for Mexico, right, and has instead destroyed so many people's livelihoods, families down in Mexico, and is in fact perhaps at the cause of a lot of today's, illegal immigration, which primarily is from Latin America, really. There are other migrant populations here that don't have proper paperwork, but really we're talking specifically mostly about Latino folks and folks from Latin America. We do have a question here from one of our callers here. It's been delivered via telepathic whiteboard message. So I think maybe Mike, you would be the best one to answer this question, but anyone, chime in here. Is it a felony to hire an undocumented worker as an employer? So if you're an employer and you hire someone knowingly, or maybe even unknowingly, that's probably two different even categories there.
Right.
Correct.
It's a civil violation, and, and you can be fined if you don't have the proper documents, called an I-9 form, proof of basically work authorization or a green card or birth in the United States. But it's not a felony. For certain egregious violations where there have been repeat violations, it might amount to a criminal offense. But for the ordinary employer, they could be subject to a fine, but not to any criminal offense.
And this is for a regular business employer, so that if I were to hire someone to do 3 hours of gardening at my house, now that changes because the I-9, what is it, the I-9?
The I-9
isn't something that gets, there's a certain limit,
That's
right?
probably true. You probably have to be an employer to require an I-9. If you have an independent contractor working with you, I don't believe you need an I-9. Is that your understanding?
So my understanding, and is that it's up to $600, or gosh, and I don't want to misstate the number of hours. So it's up to $600. Beyond that, and any person who is hiring any other person would have to collect both the I-9 and possibly other forms.
But there's another dimension to this, which, well, as Mike pointed out, it's only the people who do this on a large scale, repeatedly and continuously. Who are those people? In fact, it does happen. The reality is that for decades, really effectively since the end of the Pacero program, it has been de facto public policy. It has been something that is well known by our congressmen, by our sheriffs, by our newspaper editors, by all the powers that be, that agribusiness, our most profitable, food processing and agriculture, our most profitable, most important industry, not just here on the Central Coast, but statewide, has depended as a matter of policy, and there won't be no enforcement in the fields as long as there's a harvest to be brought in, on employment of undocumented workers. This has gone on through various kinds of shells and cutouts, to be sure, but everybody knows. And it's, for a long time, it was a dirty secret that people didn't talk about. We know it's the reality now. In my opinion, if there's anybody who should be subject to felony and to the other kinds of stress and scrutiny that people are now being placed under, it's the employers in agribusiness who have been making such a profit off of people who work in conditions that are just shouldn't exist anymore.
Yeah, it is an unreal situation because they're the real lawbreakers, and yet the government has de facto accepted the fact that they need cheap labor, and that cheap labor is undocumented, and therefore there's never been a crime for hiring an undocumented worker to protect agribusiness employers and large manufacturers. Yet these are the people that are called illegal, and yet they're the most vulnerable portion of society, and the government is breaking the families apart, yet they say that they're in favor of family values. So there's a lot of hypocrisy going around.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it just seems like such a contradiction.
Yes.
Really, that you have situations like Alabama, I know in particular, passed a really harsh, similar to Arizona style, check everyone's background, and if you're illegal, get out kind of law, and that led to a lot of flight in the agricultural industry, because why would people work under those conditions when they know there's other opportunities? And food is literally rotting in the fields. Not even just here in California, which you stated, which is agribusiness #1 industry, but all across the country, there's really that kind of situation. And again, it's just really this second-class citizenship that these people exist under. It's really not the same level of protection or security.
But at least with the new Deferred Action Program, there is hope and promise that young people who have gone to school or who are enrolled in school, some of them in college, who could help our economy.
That's right.
By getting advanced degrees and getting work, and who want to work or join the military. Those are the people that are well deserving of a grant of deferred action. And we're hopeful that people will go back to school and get a GED because they may be eligible for this program. And then that would better their lives and their families' lives and the whole community.
It just has always seemed like they're blaming the victim of these economic policies, and then the people try and make, accommodations, right? They leave their home, they go wherever they do what they have to do to survive, and then once they get there, they're again blamed as being part of the problem. And I think it speaks to this nation's history of scapegoating immigrants.
That's right.
It's not at all a uniquely Mexican, Latin American thing. I mean, you could go back in this country's history and talk about any number of ethnic groups, migrant ethnic groups that have been discriminated and kind of put on that bottom rung of the social ladder. And many have worked their way up over the years, and you've seen kind of upward mobility. But
they used to blame the Irish for having gangs, and the Italians and the Jews, and every immigrant group that's come to the country has always been scapegoated. There was the Chinese Exclusion Act, where the government excluded the Chinese after they first brought them in to do our dirty work and build our railroads.
Yeah, I mean, it's nothing new. This immigrant scapegoating, this blaming the people at the very bottom, as Paul accurately pointed out, looking the total other way for large employers, completely ignoring the fact that without migrant labor, this economy would, in a lot of ways, grind to a halt, and food products would triple, quadruple in price. Who knows how much they would rise, but there's this real, it just seems within the popular kind of anti-immigrant sentiment, this complete misunderstanding of the role that immigrants play in society. They're leeches. They're coming to take from our system and use all these services. And the common misconception, it seems like, is there a drain on the economy? When I think, how would you all respond to that? Stereotype?
I read that there were some statistics recently that that immigrants are not competing with unemployed citizens of the United States, because oftentimes, of course, they do work that citizens won't do, like stoop labor in the field or changing sheets at a hotel. And as proof of that, where there's the least unemployment, there's also the greater amount of immigrants, so that it is actually improving the economy. I'm certain there's some areas where there might be competition in the building trades, but I think on the whole, it's building the wealth of our society to have people do the work that others won't.
Well, there was the United Farm Workers Union, which had the campaign, "We have jobs for you. Come to the fields." Like, Americans, you want to work? We got you. And even it was kind of comedic that Stephen Colbert took them up on, of all people, right? The Colbert Report took them up on their offer, and they went and actually, he testified to Congress about, this is hard work. Like, I don't want to do this.
If we want to improve those jobs, and it's not just agriculture, but much of residential construction now, for example, and hotel and restaurant industry, those working conditions are not good working conditions.
Yeah.
And if we want to improve those jobs, and we say therefore citizens won't take them, and immigrants without rights are working in those conditions, the real only path forward to improving those jobs, to me, seems to be that those people need to win rights, enough rights that they can organize.
Yeah.
Enough rights that they can organize and represent themselves, and then change those conditions of employment, demand better wages, demand health and safety, demand better training, and make agriculture, for example, which is a skilled job, make agricultural employment into something that somebody can raise a family in, can send kids to college, can buy a house, and that will stabilize the workforce there. Instead of people getting out of agriculture as quick as they can and creating a vacuum to bring other people into agriculture, that's essentially the solution, is that these jobs that undocumented folks have now need to be made into jobs that are jobs through which people can pursue the American dream.
Right.
And that won't happen unless people have rights.
I could not agree more. I do believe we have a question from our studio audience, so why don't we shoot over to audience member. Hello.
Hello, I'm Betsy Phillips, and I was just wondering, the students who can go to college with the DREAM Act, are they going to be applying for federal loans from the government? And my other question is about the workers who work in the fields. Do most of them work for the commercial fields where they're exposed to a lot of pesticides, and not as many working for the organic farmers? Thanks.
Maybe you can answer that. I know you know about the state
Sure.
DREAM Act.
Sure, yeah, there's a little complexity to this. There actually were, thanks to people like Bill Monning and Luis Alejo, there were 2 laws passed and signed into law by Governor Brown this last year that'll go into effect on January 1st. And these cover children of undocumented immigrants who themselves don't have papers, who are going to college in our state. So they don't include the broader number of people who would be eligible under Obama's DREAM initiative. They do include young people going to college, though, and it makes them eligible for California financial aid, which means that they would be able to apply after citizens have received Cal grants, for example. They would be able to apply and receive Cal grants, which would make it affordable for them to be able to go to college. Of course, at the same time, we're cutting back drastically our enrollment in colleges and high schools. So we have, in colleges and community colleges. So of course we have a huge challenge there, but that is an expansion of their rights. Not federal, but only state. It's only at the California level, really, where we seem to be making some progress until this Obama initiative appeared on the horizon. And now maybe we'll make some progress on the national level as well.
That'd be great.
The other question was about where the
Pesticide
employment's
exposure.
concentrated. Pesticide exposure and other working conditions too. I should say, we every year it seems we hear a report of another person who is working in the fields and suffers a heat stroke and dies in the fields. And the kinds of health and safety protections that are so important in agriculture, which again, because workers aren't organized, they don't have the confidence, they don't have the organizational capacity and the voice to be able to speak for and represent themselves, so they're subject to this kind of victimization. There's deep concern about exposure to pesticides and profound inadequacies in providing protections for people who work in the fields. And again, people are afraid to insist on those kinds of protections. And unfortunately, our state Department of Labor does not move in as aggressively as they should to enforce this.
Well, I know it's hard to believe, but we're actually near the end of our hour.
Wow.
Yeah. Why don't we just go around the table and just do kind of 30, 45-second closing statements? I mean, anything. Where can people find more information about your various projects or the things you're involved with? Like, just final words. Let's go around the table.
Okay. Well, with regard to deferred action, I'm sure that some of the organizations which we work with will be putting out information shortly. A lot of it we don't know until August 15th, when the regulations will be drawn up. One thing I do want to emphasize is that individuals should start to gather their records if they think they qualify, but don't do anything and don't pay a notario publico, a notary public that isn't a trained legal worker who often scam people. They should wait until the regulations come out to apply, and if they have a criminal conviction or criminal arrest, they should definitely go to an attorney to determine if they're going to be excluded, because there's broad exclusions for people who have serious misdemeanors, a felony, or 3 or more misdemeanors, and they would be turning themselves in subject to deportation if they apply when they're not going to be eligible.
So wait till August 15th.
That's correct.
And then we'll see.
Yeah, they could start gathering their school records now, get their birth certificate, get it translated, but don't apply and don't pay any money yet.
Great.
What I want to say to the audience, more than anybody is, as far as immigration goes, that subject is such a broad subject. And, there are a lot of different things that we can do to pressure the federal government, local government, but I'm mostly concerned with what happens at the local level, at the immediate level. And so I want to just challenge everyone to really think about their surroundings and how the role that immigrants play in their daily lives, and to really begin to build connections with people that are immigrants, because that's one of the things that I know even day workers have brought up. You know, that these policies are dehumanizing, and it's felt, and we want to change it, and that the Day Worker Center is one of the ways that we want to do that.
30 seconds, Paul.
I'll just say we want to hear from you. We'd like to try to answer your questions if we can. So we just set up a Gmail account, Central Coast Dreamers.
Yeah.
centralcoastdreamers@gmail.com, and not only for questions. You don't have to be an undocumented immigrant. You don't have to be an immigrant. You don't have to be La Raza in order to work for human rights.
Yeah.
And if you want to become involved, if you want to find out how you can help on any of the fronts that we've talked about here, go ahead, follow up with us, and we'll follow up with you. That's centralcoastdreamers@gmail.com.
Great. Well, thank you guys all so much for joining us. We really appreciate the perspectives that you bring, the unique perspectives and the expertise. I want to thank Lupe for your questions. I want to thank you, Santa Cruz, for watching. Be sure to check us out at communitytelevision.org. You can tune in to all of our programming there. I think I'm just going to end here with the original illegal immigrant. If you can see that.
Thank you.
Show me your papers, Christopher Columbus. I don't believe there was any official Office of Homeland Security from the Native American brothers and sisters. So let's just remember that we are a nation of immigrants from the very, very get-go, and stop all the scapegoating, stop all the hating, stop all the xenophobia, racism, discrimination, please. We'll see you next time, Santa Cruz. Good night.